Hi, everybody. I'm Noreen Savage, and this is Starting Out Bright. So it's so good to see you and hear you. And we have people here in this Zoom chat with us. And just to tell you a little bit about myself, who I am and who I am not. I am, first of all, nobody official with Bright Line Eating, but I really love the program. And I got acquainted with Bright Line Eating through my friend Lori. Back in 2019, just a couple years ago in May, Lori posted on her 1-year anniversary saying she lost 57 pounds using a program called Bright Line Eating. If anybody was interested, they should just give her a holler and she would fill you in. So my hot little fingers ran over to Messenger as fast as they could. And I got the lowdown, which took me by shock, because Lori proceeded to tell me that with Bright Line Eating, there were 4 bright lines that you don't cross. No sugar, no flour, 3 meals a day, and weighed and measured portions. I was sick. I was so sad because I thought there's absolutely no way I could do that. No way. But I really liked my friend, and I said, let's go to lunch. We proceeded to talk more about it. And I let that information sit. And I found where I was. I was in a place of pain. My feet were swollen for probably a year. My knee was so bad, I was starting to use a cane. My back ached. I snored so loudly, I'd wake up my husband every night. Beyond that, the sleep apnea, where he really worried, and I wondered if I would be up in the morning many times. So I came from a place of pain. But now when I look back at that, I'm grateful because it gave me a willingness to do something so radical as Bright Line Eating. And what my friend told me was 2 things. Get the book, Bright Line Eating by Dr. Susan Pierce Thompson, and get into the Facebook group called We Eat Bright with Lines, which I did immediately. And since then, there are many, like I know of like 50 Facebook groups, but including the official Facebook group, Bright Line Eating Official, and Starting Out Bright private group, which is associated with this Zoom chat, and many others. And as I was in this We Eat Bright with Lines group, though, I was kind of in the background and noticing and listening and reading stories and seeing photos, and my hope started growing. And I thought, I'm going to do this. And I promised myself if I lasted 1 year, it chokes me up, I would do what my friend Lori did. I would post on my private Facebook page and I would help anybody I could. Well, the year came up, and just before that, I'm a Christian, and I felt God said, Noreen, you could do more than that. You could connect these people who have been so important to you and your success, watching their success, and maybe lend a hand to somebody who needs the hope that you did. And so that's how the Zooms were born. And I have been amazed at those who have been able to step up and take one for the team, as someone once said. And that person today is Robin Nickles. And I saw Robin on an official Bright Line Facebook page, and she shared a little bit about her story. And I just saw her willingness to share and help. And I had to contact her right away. And fortunately, she said yes. So here we are with Robin Nickles. Robin, so good to see you. And we had a chance to talk the other day, which was great. And, I said, just a little bit about my entry into Bright Line Eating. But I'd like to ask you if you could bring us up to speed about where you were, and you can go back as far as you want or as close to where your entry into Bright Line was. And just thanks again for being here.
Awesome. So I think I'm probably a bit unique in that I didn't lose my weight through Bright Line Eating. So going all the way back to when I was young, my childhood was pretty unique. My mom and dad met in med school at the University of Washington, and when I was 6 months old, they moved us to Alaska, and they wanted to deliver medical care by bush plane. So I was 6 months old at the time. My parents were crazy about each other. I had a really fun, happy childhood. I have 3 sisters that I adore. But I was always really heavy. My dad in particular graduated at the top of his medical school. He was chief resident. He was #1 in the state of Alaska in tennis. My mom was always model thin. My sisters are really tiny. And I was this, just from when I was very, very, honestly, as a baby, I was really overweight, and that never went away. In fact, when I was 6 years old, my parents had Weight Watchers make a special exception to their rule, and I was in Weight Watchers when I was 6. I did Nutrisystem, I did Jenny Craig. When I was in high school, I went out of state to fat camp to Hawaii, which sounds dreamy. It was horrible. But I guess I would describe my childhood as feeling like I didn't belong, like I wasn't worthy, that my parents and my family were incredible and I was the black sheep. And I had a lot of shame. I had a lot of secrecy. So, one of the predominant memories of mine is on the days that I'd come home and get off the bus, if I could get home before anybody else was in the house, I'd grab a bowl, I'd grab a bunch of sugar, I'd grab butter, I'd grab an egg, and I would run to my bedroom and I'd lock the door and I'd mix it up with my hand and I'd just scoop it up into my mouth as fast as I possibly could. And I'd be listening, out the door to hear if somebody was coming in the house or if my sisters were there. And the second I was done gorging myself, there was just shame, just so much shame. And like, what is wrong with me? And tomorrow I'm gonna starve, and tomorrow I'm gonna exercise, and tomorrow I'm gonna dig deeper. And my parents got to the point where they quit having any kind of junk food in the house. And like at dinner, my sisters were all so thin, they would say they couldn't leave the table till they ate everything on their plate, and they would tell me, you've had enough. And they were kind, but the messages I got were pervasive. It was like, if you could just, my mom would join these diet programs with me, and she was already super thin, and it was pretty obvious to me. And then, at dances and everything else, I was never the one that was selected. So anyhow, fast forward quite a long time. I got married, and again, my ex-husband, I fell head over heels for him, but he had bipolar, and I didn't know that at the time, but he needed me. Like I developed a bag of tricks. I became the class clown. I took care of other people in the community. I rescued animals. That became my role. And I, at the time I was 17 when I met my ex, but he was the smartest human being I'd ever met. I had him on a pedestal, and he felt like I was kind of his shelter to the world. And we ended up getting married in grad school. And after our second son was born, my ex-husband was hospitalized for the first time he was in a psychiatric hospital with a psychotic break. And that was probably the first time when my deception and my escape through food started to not hold up anymore. And I had a son that was a toddler. I had a newborn. I was in grad school. My ex was getting a PhD in physics, and he was in the mental hospital, and we didn't have enough money to pay the bills. And I was gorging and gorging and gorging, and there was no amount of food that could fill the hole or could get me out of my scenario. And throughout that whole phase of my life, when I would get in trouble, my parents, no matter where they were, they would show up, and they wouldn't leave until Neil was back on his feet, and they would hold down the fort with my kids. They would support me financially and emotionally, and they were incredible. And then it was 12 years ago. There's a couple things, and I can't really put them in order, to be honest, but I remember I'd go to Lane Bryant, and I'd go like in the middle of the week, and I'd sneak in at like 10 in the morning, and I'd try to strategize so my friends wouldn't see me there. And I remember I went to Lane Bryant, and I would wait till like my clothes were so disgustingly ratty, and I hated clothes shopping. But I went in, and I couldn't fit into a size 22, which was the largest size that they carried at the time. And there was a disconnect, right? Like I didn't look at mirrors. I refused to face myself. I wouldn't let people photograph me. And I remember looking at the tag and being like, oh my God, this is me. And like just a complete reality check, and just so much shame and humility and going home. And then it was around the same time my dad was diagnosed with cancer, and it was terminal. And he'd been my lifeboat. Like, my dad had always been my lifeboat. And my ex-husband was really doing poorly with his mental health. And I had 2 kids. And it was probably the first time in my life where there was just this message that was, you've got to grow up really, really fast, because you got 2 kids to support. And the people who held you up your whole life are going down. And there was no Bright Line Eating at the time. There was no book. I found a book called The Schwarzbein Principle that was written by an endocrinologist. That was the first turning point. And it was so radically different. It wasn't eat things in moderation and calories in and calories out. It was addiction. It was that obesity is not the disease, it's a symptom of the disease. The disease is addiction. And I read the book, and it was like, I had nothing to lose at that point, honestly. And so I tried it. And you could have held a gun to my head, and I wasn't going to eat flour, and I wasn't going to eat sugar, and I wasn't going to snack. Those went with the Schwarzbein Principle. And over the next year, I lost about 70 pounds, and I got really compulsive. I was exercising like a maniac. My dad was getting sicker and sicker. My ex-husband was getting sicker and sicker. And I just held on with everything I had. Sorry, I have a little.
So this is the part where this is, it's interesting how life just came at you. If you didn't have enough going on with your own personal life with your now ex-husband, now you find out your dad has terminal cancer, right?
Yes.
This is all converging, and this is when you're feeling like the ship is sinking.
The ship is sinking.
The ship is sinking. You're hanging on, but you have this one thing. You have the book.
I have the book, and I started this diet, and I had this focus, but the focus was really fear-based, and it was like, it was the only thing in my life I could control. And man, did I control it. And the weight fell off pretty quickly. And then I joined. So losing the weight wasn't actually that hard. That's the irony. It was keeping it off. It's once I had this image that once I lost all this weight, I'd somehow be safe. Like someone would come rescue me, or I would, people would choose me. I would be the one that people would want to love, or whatever. All this warped fairy tale stuff from my childhood. And I got down to a 00 size. I was super thin, and life did not get easy. And that's when I stepped into the doors of Overeaters Anonymous, and simultaneously Susan Pierce Thompson started posting things on YouTube that I found long before her book was published. And it was all about addiction and the biochemistry of food and the way that the brain works. And it was like it was OA, I was going to the meetings, but they didn't really resonate. Bright Line Eating and Susan Pierce Thompson, for so long I felt alone, and I had people telling me I was a nut and all things in moderation. I mean, this was 12, 13 years ago. When I'd walk into a restaurant and try to ask for stuff that was grain and sugar-free, they'd look at me like, you're one of those people,
Right.
So
that's absurd.
That was absurd. And
everything is in moderation.
Everything in moderation.
But now let me ask you something. You've lost the weight. At this time, do you have peace in your brain?
No, it's the sickest I've ever been. It's the
so
sickest I've ever been.
You are just you're still in such a stress mode.
I am white knuckling every aspect of my life. I'm screaming at my kids. I'm screaming at my ex. I'm disengaged from my family. I'm just hanging on. And I'm thinking, if I can just hold on, if I can just, if I can white knuckle life, then we'll make it.
And you're not divorced yet.
I'm not divorced.
So you're married, but he's got the health problems, the mental health problems that he's dealing with, which means you're dealing with. So and your parents were so supportive, but they've got now their own situation.
Right. So my dad was diagnosed with cancer. Neil was hospitalized 5 times about every 4 years. He'd be hospitalized again. And with each hospitalization, he'd just get further and further away. And same, I would also get further and further away. And then it was, I've lost track, 7 years ago, I flew home, I filed for divorce, and I flew home to spend Christmas with my parents. And that was December 19th. And on the 21st, my dad and my sister and my brother-in-law and my niece went to go walk the brand new puppy to this bit of land that was our family tradition. My mom and I stayed back to cook dinner. And Ava, my 7-year-old niece, lost control of the leash and the puppy ran out into the road. And she yelled that the puppy had gotten free. And my dad didn't even hesitate. He just ran in the road. And my sister and my brother-in-law turned around and got in the road and put their arms up to try to make sure there was no traffic and there was a car coming. She was really slow, but there was a car coming and they tried to wave her down and she kept going. And Amy and Brad just heard the impact. My niece saw everything. And my mom and I were in the kitchen and we got a phone call and I don't remember what was said. I just remember the look on my mom's face and the tone of her voice. And she said something to the effect of, Dad's been hit and it's bad. And I remember screaming obscenities at my mom, which I would never do normally, and yelling at her to get in the car. And we were not even a quarter mile away. And so we raced to the accident scene. And my dad, who was just like this invincible, larger than life, just my rock, was, he was still alive, but he was not conscious. And my mom, who'd always been a first responder, was in the fetal position on the side of the road. And my niece and my sister and my brother-in-law were working like maniacs trying to keep him alive. And that was another turning point for me. I remember being on the side of the road looking up at the sky and screaming to God, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you, and I will never forgive you for this. This is the kindest person I have ever known, and I don't understand why you have to take the people that are the kindest. So that was 6 years ago, and I flew home from the funeral, and I went to my Overeaters Anonymous meeting. And I was telling Noreen later that the turning point was that morning was the first time I actually really talked to God. And
on the side of the road.
On the side of the road, I was actually talking to God, like I was connected. It was, I hate you and I will never forgive you, but it was real. And the next morning I went to OA it was the next morning, it was when I got back. And I went to let everybody know what a sham this whole thing was and how done I was with control and food plans and Overeaters Anonymous and all of it. I was just so over it. And I'd given every single thing I had, and I had nothing as far as I was concerned. I had no ground to stand on. And so I went to OA and I told everybody this is a sham and this is what's happened. And I hate this program and I want out and I just want to die. And I just wanted to let you know where I'm at. And the people in OA just hugged me. And they called and they showed up at my house and they would not stop calling. And I kept, each morning I'd get up and I would pray to die because I did not want to have to get up and I did not want to have to face another day. And I could not imagine ever being happy again. And I kept getting these messages to just get to meetings and to just, and all along I'd kind of, there was this distance between me and everybody else. There was like, I can control my food plan. I can control my exercise. I can control my environment, to I can control nothing and I give up. And I will just show up. And if you tell me what to do, I'll do it. And I won't fight you anymore. And it was radical. It was such a radical change. And for the first time in my life, there was no food. There was no chatter. There was no background noise. There was no hunger. I just ate what I had written down I would eat. I showed up at meetings. If I had a sponsor at the time, well, I still have a sponsor, but if she told me what to do, if she said jump, I said how high. And that was 7 years ago. And
I would just want to stop for 1 second.
Sure.
Because to get the timeline right. And if I'm, correct me if I'm wrong. You said before you went, before your dad passed away, before that moment on the road where you're telling God you hate him. Mm-hmm. But you were real in that moment. Mm-hmm. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, because what I'm hearing you say is it was just kind of lip service at OA before that. And was that the higher power piece? Is that
Yes.
what was, okay. So
And with
that,
bright line eating too, I mean, I think that for me, and I know bright line eating can have a spiritual component or it can't. I mean, the truth is when I walked into OA, I had no interest in God or higher power, any of it. I just wanted the food plan that would get me thin. I had no other aspirations. I didn't even want to quit eating compulsively. I just wanted to figure out like a workaround, you know,
the way, what you could get away with.
the way I could get away with it. Yeah. And in my mind, it wasn't conscious, but in my mind, if I could just get skinny enough, everything would be solved. And then I got skinny. I mean, I was throwing up, I was exercising compulsively, but I was thin and none of my problems went away. The night on the road with my dad was the first night that I was actually surrendered. And it was the first night that I let go of that whole idea that I could control my environment and that if I was, you know, all of that stuff suddenly in an instant didn't matter. And it was about, I just want peace. I want peace. I don't care what it kill me or show me the next right step because I'm doing absolutely every single thing I can and nothing is working.
So you go back to OA then after the
Yes.
funeral, which is soon after.
Yes.
And so you still have that presence of mind to go back, but this time, folks, I'm going to set you straight. This is all ridiculous. What we're doing here doesn't matter, you know,
Stupid. Yep.
and, you know, forget about it. But the turnaround is now people aren't letting you go so fast. They're coming around you, and you don't have BLE yet, right?
Well, so that's taking place at the same time, right? Like I've heard all these talks on YouTube and I've listened to them and I've heard like there's this background noise of addiction, addiction, addiction. But I'm, you know, at that point, I'm still at times eating stuff that is trigger foods and then I'm throwing it up and I'm exercising whenever I would binge. It was all about control. And so it was, don't quote me on the timing, but it was right around the same time that I got a notice that Susan Pierce Thompson was publishing this book. And I was on the list before it was published. I was on the pre-publication list and I was hanging on. Like I remember knowing I needed to read that book. And at the same time, it was this radical shift in OA where I would go to meetings and I would sit there, but the whole time I'd be looking at everybody in the room going, I don't relate to you and my problem is bigger than yours and you're weird or whatever, you know, just distance. To after my dad died, walking into the rooms and realizing the people that triggered me because they had something I actually really needed to hear and listen. And it was stuff I had never been ready to face in my own life. And
So then you became active with OA.
yes.
And what does that mean? I'm not accustomed to it. I don't know the program. I know there are 12 steps, but what would that mean to someone? For example, just the part about OA. What is it?
So, you know, and Susan Pierce Thompson also started out in OA, but the idea behind OA is the addiction is arbitrary. The substance is arbitrary. And it's growing up without tools to face life on life's terms. And as long as you don't develop those tools, you will continually look for other ways to escape life, which is exactly what I did. I went from food to I went to throwing up, I went to exercise, I went to men, and I could control and I could white knuckle life, but there was absolutely no peace and there was no freedom. OA gives you the tools where when you take away the substance and life gets loud, there's just step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the OA piece is, the idea behind it is that addiction, the what you're addicted to is arbitrary. It's the same program if it's Alcoholics Anonymous, Overeaters Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, the substance is arbitrary. Addiction is an inability to face life on life's terms. It's growing up with pain, with rejection, with fear, and finding some way to numb out other than actually addressing what the actual issue is. And so the 12 steps are just, it's like a guidebook in how to actually navigate life without having to use substances or things that are self-destructive to escape. So for me personally, I have maintained a 100-pound weight loss for, I'm going on 13 years. There is no struggle. I'm not afraid of the scale. I am really proud of my body. I can I now have a business where I take people in the backcountry and I hike with them way up in the mountains. I cannot, my whole life is beyond anything that I dreamed of the day that I walked into OA or found Susan Pierce Thompson. But for me, I have to have both, right? Overeaters Anonymous for me gives me the tools so that I don't relapse. Bright line eating is the food plan I have to have, and the understanding and chemistry behind food addiction to have it make sense, and to keep me on track. And honestly, these Facebook pages too. I mean, I will happily give back because so many people showed up just like you, Noreen, and they were there for free when I really, really needed them. So anyhow.
It's definitely, and you talked about like the circle of recovery.
Yes.
That in part of the recovery is staying close enough to the problem, right?
Yes.
In
Yes.
a way, so that you don't get cocky. And did you during this period of time?
I think there've been periods of my life where I've thought I'm healthy enough, I can fudge the food plan, or I can skip maybe some meetings because I'm dating and I'm having fun, or it's holidays. And the food, for me, I think of the food as a check engine light. Like when I start to have chatter in the back of my mind, like I start to fantasize about that food, or I'm looking forward to the next meal, that is, there's something going on with me emotionally that I'm not facing. And I've learned, I mean, it's been a long process, but I've learned as soon as those signals start to come up, it is not about willpower. It's not about, that I exercise too much. There is a fear, there's a resentment, or there's something I'm procrastinating on that I haven't been willing to face. And if I sit down and I do the work, that goes away. That just goes away.
I want to talk just a tiny bit about your experience at Lane Bryant, because I happened to work at Lane Bryant years ago. We didn't talk about this, but
yeah,
what you experienced, I was very slender at that time of my life, but I worked in the shoe department. And just as you had like looking at that size 22 tag, this was an experience I had several times where I would get shoes for a woman and she'd say, well, I wear a size 8, let's say, for example. So I'd get the size 8 and she's putting the shoe on and it's obviously not a size 8 foot. It's more like a 9 or a 10. But she's getting it on and she's even buying the shoes because I want to say the shoe does not fit you. But in her mind, apparently, I mean, I can just visualize some of these things that have happened in that shoe department. And it was this body dysmorphia that related even to shoes.
Yes.
They really would walk out with a too tight shoe than to admit, like, no, I need the bigger size. And that always stuck with me. It gives me a chill right now thinking about it because I could not understand that until I had my own body dysmorphia. And I still do a little bit. But you lost the weight drastically from there. And it wasn't a pleasant ride either because it was the white knuckling, which then led to surrender only after you had a literal come to Jesus moment.
Well, and I wanted to share too, and this is more OA, and if it's not for someone in the room, I totally understand. But, I remember one of the promises when you walk into OA is if you do the work, it's kind of like taking antibiotics for an infection. If you do the steps, you cannot help but recover. There's a promise. And there's also a promise that you'll be happy, joyous, and free, and that your life will be beyond your wildest dreams. And I remember reading that over and over and being like, whatever. And then again, the night that my dad died, I remember clearly looking up at the sky and just saying, why? I will never forgive you. And this isn't, Noreen, it's not related to Lane Bryant, but it's kind of just the completion of the last 6 years. 3 years ago, my older son was coming home from work. He was in college at the time. He was on Christmas break and he was coming home from work. And I'd had a party that night and I my phone was shut off, and at 4 a.m. I woke up and I knew something horrific had happened. I just knew. And I ran down to turn on my phone, and there was a message from my ex-husband that said, Ryan's been hit by a drunk driver and he's in the ICU and he's going into surgery, come quickly. And I raced to the ICU and I got as far as the doors of the ICU, and I could not walk through the doors. I remember the night that my dad died, walking through those doors. I remember the room where they told me he had died, and I just could not. And so I sat down in front of the doors, and a nurse came and got me and told me that she immediately said, "Are you Ryan Nickles' mom?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "He's alive. It's really, really bad, but he is alive and he needs you." And she picked me up and she walked me into the room, and Ryan, he'd bit off his tongue, he'd displaced his teeth, he'd ruptured his eardrum, and his scalp completely came off in the accident, and he was in a coma and he'd quit breathing. And so this was the morning after the surgery to put his scalp back on. And my background, my master's degree is in neuroscience. And so I understand all of the tests that they were going to do. And they said he had a traumatic brain injury and that it was going to be a really hard day, and they were going to do all these tests to see where he was at and get a baseline. And we were welcome to be present if we wanted. But if we couldn't be positive, they needed us to leave. And so I said, no, I'm good. I'm good. And so we walked into the room, and Ryan was there, and they started with the 3MS, which is just a classic test. And they had him counting backwards by 7. And I remember he looked at us and he was like 93, 86, 79, 72, 65. Keep going. And they just kept looking at him and shaking their heads. And they kept doing all these tests. And then the trauma surgeon tapped me on the shoulder and asked if he could talk to me out in the hallway. And I said, sure. And I walked out, and he said that he'd been in medicine for, I don't know if it was 20 or 30 years. And he said, your son should be dead, and he should have profound brain damage. And he said, I'm not a religious person, but your son has a guardian angel. He should not have survived this accident, and we cannot detect any brain damage at all. And I was like, in my mind, I was right back on the side of the road screaming, why? And in my head, my dad was a surgeon. I can see him on the side of the road. I can just see him saying, not on my watch, not on my watch, next to Ryan. And that's just one of the things that's taken place in the last 6 or 7 years. Like my ex-husband, who had bipolar, who refused to get help, is now the moderator for the Bipolar Support Alliance group. He reaches out to the community to help other people who are struggling. My dad's best friend from medical school set my mom up on a blind date 3 years after my dad died, and it's his partner who was widowed the year before my mom. And they got married 2 years ago, and I adore my stepdad. I absolutely love him. And my son that was in the horrific car accident is an electrical engineer at Apple now. Like, just all of these areas of my life that I thought could never possibly, I'd never find, it was like, it wasn't even, I would just never find peace. Like, I couldn't even imagine what was possible. Now I look back, and all this stuff that I fought and I thought about life, I realized I had it all wrong. If I could have just let go. But anyhow, I'm going off. I'll quit.
Well, I think that it's actually speaks so much to the piece about surrender. We don't know, what we don't know. We talked a little bit about when you read is it Schwartzheim principle?
Schwartzheim principle. Mm-hmm.
And the name of the book is in the slideshow. So for those who are going to look at this on YouTube, it's on there. But it was really a fascinating read, it sounds like. And I had never heard of this book before. But one thing that we talked about was this principle that obesity, how does that go? Obesity is not the disease.
So she's an endocrinologist, and she headed up UCLA's diabetes clinic. And at the time, everybody was put on the American Heart Association diet, which was high carbohydrate, low fat. And they got sicker and sicker and sicker. And Dr. Schwartzbein became the head of the #1 diabetes clinic in the world and found all her patients getting sicker and sicker and sicker, and then turned to veterinary medicine and saw in veterinary medicine, they take away, which, bright line eating isn't advertised as low carbohydrate, but it absolutely is. It's your carbohydrate is early in the morning, which is exactly The same principles as Dr. Schwartzbein and her
No,
diabetes.
I think it was you were explaining about this principle, how where bright line eating mirrors this principle, bright line eating has your carbs in the morning.
Yes.
So it's facing the nighttime low carb.
Exactly. So Dr. Schwartzbein talks about there are perfect foods that exist. A hard-boiled egg is a perfect food. It's the perfect percentage of carbohydrate to protein to fat, where you can trust the neurofeedback loop. You will never binge on hard-boiled eggs. It's not possible. And it's because it's a food that, from an evolutionary standpoint, is the perfect ratio. If you look at Dr. Schwartzbein's diet and you look at Susan Pierce Thompson's diet, they're virtually identical. And both of them talk about biochemistry. Susan Pierce Thompson is much more about food addiction. Schwartzbein principle is more about evolution in our pancreas and how our food has evolved to be extremely refined, high carbohydrate, and yet our bodies are still, our pancreas is just not designed to eat that food. And so our biofeedback loop gets really hijacked. And that's how food addiction begins and accelerates and grows. So it's two different looks at the exact same thing, but they're very, very much complementary to each other.
So would you say that we get into a mess with this food situation because of the down regulation that happens and our receptors are thinned out? That Susan talks about in the book where it takes more, but yet, going back to that piece in the book, I always remember the analogy about sex with prehistoric times, basically, that if somebody wanted to get a rise, they'd have to kind of sneak behind a bush and watch somebody in a pond. But now, like, for example, and that would get them excited. That would really get them excited. But now with an onslaught of porn 24/7, I think your heart would totally explode unless those receptors are thinned out so that you can manage this level of endorphins and all of that. So this is what I'm understanding as far as this whole onslaught now of refined sugar and flour. It just takes more and more and more, and we're a mess with our brain until we can somewhat heal. When we talked the other day, within the first 2 minutes, you used the word miracle. Now, you talked about your son, which he's obviously got that guardian angel. I'm thinking your dad. But you have a miracle going on. I mean, you're a child in the bedroom with butter. Look at you now. What do you see? You're talking about all these things happen. Could you have even imagined this 13 years ago?
I just wanted to be a certain way. I had no aspirations I couldn't fit into the largest size at Lane Bryant, and now I'm taking people on 15-mile journeys up the mountain. All of it, like my relationship with my kids, my relationship with my family, it's like, it's just such a miracle to me that I love what I get to eat, but I do not live to eat. Like, food is just quiet. I could have never even dreamed of that being a possibility, or at least I didn't. I
remember you talking about your youngest son, who you had a conversation with him, because I said, what has this done with your kids? I mean, what do they see as far as mom in this? Has to have been a huge change in just how you lived, beyond all the things you personally went through. But now you're dealing with the food, like, really head on. You're going to OA, you're doing the program. What changed for your children? And then you talked about your youngest, what he said.
Yeah. So when I was in my addiction, my kids were an annoyance. That sounds horrific, but that's the truth. My kids, like, I was so focused on my weight and my diet and control that if my kids had conferences or they had a sporting event or they were fighting, there was no headspace for any of that. And my younger son was not doing well in school, and he had this just trigger temper, and he would rage. And my other memory is when I would walk in the door, Sean would go upstairs and Ryan would go downstairs. Like, they would just try to get as much distance between myself and them as possible and try to stay out of the house. Now, this was probably, I don't even know, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I remember looking at Sean and saying, your temper's totally gone. It's completely gone. And he said, well, you know why, right? And I said, no. He's like, Mom, your temper's totally gone. And that was a complete, like, I mean, it just totally, it's true. I don't like try to hide a temper. The temper is gone. I've worked through the stuff that I was so angry about, and I'm not trying to control my own life, and I'm certainly not trying to control theirs anymore. And now my older son's in California, and he's coming home for Thanksgiving, and he's coming home for Christmas. And I was out there last month. Sean and I had dinner on Monday. Like, when we're together, we are together. And now when they have issues that come up, I can actually be present. I can actually hear and I can listen. And I don't try to control or have an agenda. I just can be present. And it's night and day. It's really night and day.
That's just so amazing. I want to talk a little bit about the tools that you use.
Mm-hmm.
From our conversation, you didn't go to a boot camp, but you read the book. Mm-hmm. And you don't keep a food journal, correct? But you do journal.
I journal a lot.
And what do you do about the journal? What piece is that? Is it gratitude or just everything in that book?
So I get up in the morning and I try to do a quick prayer that is the essence of the prayer is get me out of myself and help me show up and be of service. Breakfast is exactly the same pretty much every day. It's the steel cut oats with the yogurt and the blueberries and the nuts. I weigh and measure that. Don't ask me why I weigh and measure that. And then I don't weigh and measure my lunch and dinner, but I don't. My journal is when I get triggered. Whenever food starts to get loud or there's something that is making me mad or angry or I just don't feel comfortable about, I get out the journal and I ask, where am I being selfish, self-seeking, dishonest, afraid, or inconsiderate? And I work it out and I figure out my part, and then I show up and apologize. If there's something that I need to apologize about, I apologize. And then the food gets quiet again. My food, it's weird. I really enjoy it, but it's very routine. There's none of the like baked goods and the making food sexy anymore. It's really basic. Throw together. I can kind of do it in my sleep, and it's very comforting, but it's sustenance. It's no longer meaning. I don't like Thanksgiving is coming up and I'm going to have turkey and I'm going to have vegetables. I could care less about all this. I'll make them because my family will be there. But that's been a radical change for me too. And then the other tools are every morning I log on to Bright Line Eating and I log on to your page too. And if somebody has a question and I feel like there's something I have to offer from my 12 years, then I do. And if I'm in trouble, I get my butt to an OA meeting. I contact my sponsor, I work on my journaling, and I make sure I stay close to the Facebook page.
Now, what you said a minute ago about when you ask yourself in the journal if something has triggered you, and you said something like, am I selfish, self-seeking, dishonest, afraid, or inconsiderate? Are those things from OA that you learned?
That is the fundamental tool with OA. The idea behind OA is as addicts, we tend to be victims. We tend to create this story in our head that the world is doing us wrong. People aren't showing up for us the way that we think they should. We have a script for how we think the world should go. And because it's not, we're angry, we're sad, we're angry, and we're fighting battles. And our biggest comfort is food or drugs or alcohol. And so OA teaches you cannot change other people, but you can change how you show up and you can change the story. And no matter what the circumstances, you always play some part. And so, if Like recently, I had one that was really, really tough. It's one of my closest friends. I found out was dating an ex-boyfriend of mine behind my back. And I still really care about him, and she knows that. Like before OA, I would be raging and I would have every reason in the world to relapse and eat everything I want to comfort myself. I'd probably be calling her on the phone to tell her all kinds of horrible things, and it would just spiral. With OA, it's I sit down, where am I being selfish, self-seeking, dishonest, afraid, or inconsiderate? And the truth is, I have done things in my life I regret. When I've been in enough pain, I have sought comfort from other people that isn't healthy. We're all human. We all make mistakes. I'm not in a relationship with him. He did not have a commitment to me. And, but I would never have those tools. I would never be able to sit down and create a new story where I'm not a victim and I have to self-destruct. And I'm peaceful with that, which feels crazy to me, but I am. It's okay.
Well, I think that is a powerful multi-level question to ask yourself. I had never heard that before. And I think that's very powerful to look at in the moment triggers.
Yes.
Like, what is going on here? I love that. Afraid, inconsiderate. I mean, you can really look at so many different situations and come back to that. I would call it throat hunger. Like, what is it right here?
Yes.
What is it that I'm trying to stuff down? It's not up here and it's not in my heart. It's like right here. I don't know. It's different for everyone, but these questions get to it. Selfish, self-seeking, dishonest, afraid, or inconsiderate. That's really
and
pretty.
typically what I find is that I think I know what the story should be. It's that I'm trying to control my environment, and I'm trying to control other people, and I'm trying to control my higher power, or whatever you want to call it, the universe. And it's against what is actually happening in my life. And as long as there's a disconnect between those two, it's me that suffers. It's not everybody else. I self-destruct. As soon as I quit with the idea that I can control other people in my environment and instead just show up, I'm peaceful.
It's going back to that facing life on life's terms. Well, our time is getting pretty close here, and I want to ask you a couple more questions. One is, in all of this, and there is so much here, so much. What would you say are the top non-scale victories in all of this journey for you?
My relationship with my family, bar none, my kids. I adore my kids, but now I'm really connected to them. And I feel like I am the daughter, and I am the sister, and I am the mom I always wanted to be. That's by far the first one. I can just be present, I guess. I'm proud of myself. One of my biggest regrets with my dad's death is when he died, I was thin, but I was super self-destructive. I was very selfish. I was really vain. I was pushing away the people in my life I really cared about. And one of my biggest regrets is that when he died, I am not proud of the person I was. And I know it hurt him to see me self-destructing. Probably another one of my biggest non-scale victories is I know if my dad were sitting next to me now, he'd say, I am so proud of you. So that'd be that's a huge one.
That's for sure.
Oh, and I guess my last one is I can participate in life. My whole first 38 years of life, I was a bystander, watching everything else going on and wanting to have the energy and the confidence to partake and step in. Now I get to actually do it. And it's amazing.
I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you mentioned something the other day that really stuck with me. You said about your mom when your dad passed away and she talked at his funeral. And she said something that, in a way, having this terminal illness, even though he beat the cancer eventually, but then he died of the accident.
Right.
That it was almost like you had borrowed time and said, so you really appreciated life. You're beyond borrowed time right now. You have added life to your life, don't you think?
Totally. And what my mom said at my dad's funeral was, I never in a million years would have thought a terminal cancer diagnosis would be a gift, but that they had lived every single day from the date of his diagnosis, knowing they were on borrowed time. And it's funny, I would not have But you're exactly right. I have a gratitude and an appreciation that I've just had, between my dad and my son's accident, I don't take for granted anymore that I'm going to live forever, and that I can put off for tomorrow the stuff I want to do today. I feel really, really grateful for my life.
It's really beautiful. Robin, one more thing. Tonight, or maybe somebody's listening on YouTube or podcast, and thank you for letting me record this. But somebody is listening to you and they're tracking with your story. Maybe not in the same tragic way of some of your life events, but they've seen their life out of control. What would you say to them about bright line eating and OA?
You're not alone. I used to think my story was fundamentally different from others, and I think it's all variations on the same theme. I think we've all been fed some really painful, awful messages that we're weak or we don't have enough willpower if we tried harder, and we haven't recognized that this really is addiction, and addiction is a disease. And until you can actually really get clarity about that, you can't beat it. And that recovery is possible. It's not just about achieving some weight or something. Real recovery is actually possible.
And you're living it now. For you to say that you're basically, here I am. I'm still like 2 years into this, and I'm thinking, ooh, Thanksgiving's coming up. And I'm considering, what should I do for this or that? Will I go off my lines and stuff? And what I'm hearing you say, yeah, we'll have turkey, but it's food. You're free, right?
Free. And I have clarity. When I look at Thanksgiving, I look at taking a break from Thanksgiving as no different from an alcoholic going, just today I'll have that shot, and then the next day I'll get back on track. That's not possible. I have relapsed enough times that I know how painful and how hard it is to get back on track. So Thanksgiving for me will be Thursday. And the only difference is my protein will be turkey. And even more, if I've got one thing to tell everybody, Thanksgiving in itself, in general, people sail through. It's the day after and the day after when there's all those leftovers in the fridge and you've like white knuckled up until Thanksgiving is over. And so for me, again, I really do have freedom, which is insane. I still can't believe that. But yeah, my food will be no different on Thursday or Friday or Saturday. And I'll make the other stuff just for my family, but I won't be tasting it or touching it or dreaming about that maybe I could just get away this once with eating it and then get back on track.
That's great. Well, Robin, thank you so much for being here tonight. Got a lot to think about and a lot of resources. I think that you're speaking about OA almost as it's your accountability, but you're using it hand in hand. You really sound like you need one, you need both.
I do. Maybe others don't, but for me, there is no way I could be where I'm at today without both of them.
And now it's easier than ever. I believe you can just go on the OA.org and find a meeting even by Zoom, correct?
Yeah, and they're free. It's all free. There's meetings all over the world. You can go to OA.org. And if anybody wants to reach out to me, I'm very happy to answer questions or whatever. I feel like one of the greatest gifts about my eating addiction, honestly, is it's forced me to face myself, and it's forced me to create really meaningful friendships and relationships that I wouldn't have otherwise, that are just a huge part of my life. So yeah, if anybody wants to reach out, I'm here.
Your hand in the circle of recovery.
Yes.
I see it in action, and I really appreciate so much everything that you shared tonight, your beautiful story. When I say beautiful, to be able to be vulnerable like that, there's nothing, we said the other day, I think you learn more, not so much from someone's strengths, but what they've had to struggle through. If everything was a piece of cake, there wouldn't be that much to really think about in all of this. But it's not that easy, and it's not just about the food. And so when we tackle from the inside out, that's when I think peace and recovery can happen. So, well, again, thank you, everybody. And I'm going to sign off as I do each week. Good night. Stay bright. Don't let the bed bugs bite. Good night, everybody.
Thank you very much.
So, Robin, how would you like to play 3-Question Thursday?
Absolutely.
3-Question Thursday, where everybody wins. And I don't know what the questions are. Okay. But, as you talked a minute ago, you said something that you don't know why you weigh and measure your breakfast, but not your lunch or dinner. Is that a one-plate meal? Is that what you're doing? Lunch
Yeah,
and dinner?
it's not conscious anymore. Before bright line eating, when I was white knuckling it was a salad plate, and half of the plate had to be vegetables, and a fourth of the plate had to be protein, and then I had to have at least a tablespoon of fat. So there was higher fat, but other than that, it was 3 meals. It was just measured in a different way, and it was very similar as far as, I guess, the balance of protein. Probably the only difference was there was lower carbs, but other than that, it was super, super similar.
And so you just got on that same agenda, like every time for those meals. So that is freedom.
It is. Then, I've got, so it's over 12 years. So I've done cruises. I whitewater rafted the Grand Canyon for 2 weeks. I've done trips where having a scale and weighing your food, especially on the Grand Canyon, that was not going to cut it. So I've had to develop techniques where the one plate rule salad plate has worked really well for me. But yeah, that's where I'm at now.
Okay. When we talked, there was a question that you really love this Cherokee proverb.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so that one's ironic because my maiden name is Wolf, and my dad was an ophthalmologist who would go out into the Indian Eskimo villages to deliver medical care. And my dad had a profound love of the Indian and Eskimo cultures. But there is a Cherokee saying, and I'm probably slaughtering it, but it's apparently a chief to a young person in the tribe, and he's explaining to the young boy that there's 2 wolves that reside in all of us, and they're in an eternal battle with each other. And one of them is greed and lust and anger and hatred. And the other one is love and forgiveness and kindness and compassion. And the little boy asked the chief which one wins, and the chief says whichever one you feed. And I love that. And to me, that is a way. A way is teaching how to find compassion and love and forgiveness where once there was hate and resentment and fear.
So amazing. And the last thing, a question, when we talked, and I think you did say it tonight too, this sentence, I am exactly where I'm meant to be.
Mm-hmm.
When you sponsor people, I'm sure that you communicate that in some way. Is it the empathy that you have for them based on your own life experiences that now you can give that hand out? What does that all mean to you? I am exactly where I'm meant to be, and how you can mentor or support others.
That's another OA concept. And the idea is, as addicts, we think that we have a corner on truth. We think the world owes us a certain script. And if people would just show up and participate in the way that we think they should in our head, then we'll be happy, then we'll be free. And that keeps us locked. Instead, I look at my eating disorder as one of the best gifts of my whole life. I never would have become the person I am. I never would have cultivated the friendships I have. I never would have, I grew up with this super entitled childhood. I had money. I had, we had a tennis court. We got to travel everywhere we wanted. I thought I had a corner on truth with how my husband was supposed to show up and how the world was supposed to treat me. And my eating disorder has gotten me down on my knees, and it's forced me to have humility and compassion for other people. So when I have someone that I'm working with, that I'm sponsoring, and they have a relapse and they call me, and typically there's a lot of shame, and they're like, I don't want to tell you this, but I was having a really rough time, and I ate a cake or whatever. And And my answer always is, this is not about willpower. This is a disease. And disease feeds on shame and secrecy. And the single biggest gift you gave yourself was picking up the phone and calling. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Don't give your disease that power. You had to have this relapse. I don't know why, but you had to have this relapse to get clarity, to get the tools that you need to keep going. Every relapse I had, my childhood was necessary to be where I am right now. And so when I'm fighting against the world, or I'm pushing and I'm angry, or the food chatter starts to come back, I have to remind myself, I am trying to control my external environment, and I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. And if I get out my journal and I look around at the signs around me, I'll figure out why I had to have this relapse, why there had to be this thing that I can't make sense of. And instead of it being confining, it opens things up and it makes the food chatter go away. I don't know if that makes sense, but.
Oh, it makes so much sense. It's phenomenal. Right there. That I want to just send out in the world right there. That was amazing. And I'm going to go back and listen to this over and over. Thank you so much, Robin. Truly. Thanks for being on Starting Out Bright. And thank you for playing 3 Question Thursday.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Okay. Hope to talk soon. Good night, everybody. Stay bright.